Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and let our minds drift back to a civilization that, in many ways, laid the foundation for much of our modern world, ancient Greece. But we're not going to talk about philosophers or grand temples. Instead, we're going to explore a far less glamorous, far more disturbing reality: why ancient Olympic Games were disturbingly violent. You might imagine noble athletes competing in glorious arenas. But the truth, even from its very humble origins, was a deep-seated culture of extreme physical risk and ritualized brutality. You probably wouldn't have volunteered to participate unless you absolutely had to. Or perhaps you had a truly terrifying thirst for glory. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in for tonight's journey, feel free to drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Whether that's a cozy evening in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon, or the early morning hours in a bustling New York City apartment. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself. Now, a young man named Lycurgus, perhaps no older than 18, living in the fiercely independent city-state of Argos, around 600 BCE. You've been training for years, dreaming of the day you might compete in the Pan-Hellenic Games, perhaps even the Olympics themselves, held in the sacred precinct of Olympia. The idea of competing for glory, for an olive wreath, sounds noble and inspiring, like winning a gold medal today. But the reality is far from the sanitized images we see on TV, even in their humble origins. These games were not just about athletic prowess. They were a profound expression of a society that revered physical domination, endurance, and, frankly, violence. You've heard the stories, whispered in the Palaestra wrestling school, tales of broken bones, gouged eyes, and even death. This is the truth of the ancient games, where the humble origins of athletic competition were steeped in a deeply disturbing culture of acceptable brutality. A constant reminder that the path to glory was paved with pain, and often blood. It's like entering a friendly neighborhood basketball game today, but the rules permit eye gouging, and the loser might just get their arm broken. The ancient Olympic Games, and indeed all the Pan-Hellenic Games like the Pythian, Nemean, and Isthmian Games, were fundamentally different from their modern counterparts. They were not just sporting events, they were religious festivals, acts of worship to the gods, particularly Zeus. This sacred context, however, did not temper their brutality. In fact, it might have, in some twisted way, justified it. The intensity of the physical struggle, the willingness to endure pain, and even the shedding of blood could be seen as offerings, demonstrations of arete excellence or virtue worthy of divine favor. This underlying philosophy meant that the humble origins were rooted in a very different worldview than our own, one where the line between competition and combat was blurred. Even the seemingly gentle sports had an edge. Take wrestling, for example. While modern wrestling has weight classes, rounds, and specific pins, ancient Greek wrestling was far more open. There were no weight divisions, meaning a smaller man could face a much larger, heavier opponent. The goal was to throw your opponent 3 times, but throws could be incredibly violent. Imagine being slammed onto hard ground, perhaps even rock, with no padding. Submissions were less common. It was about overwhelming your opponent with brute force. You could try to break fingers to get a grip, or crush an opponent's ribs with a powerful body slam. It was a true test of strength and resilience, where victory often came at the cost of serious injury. A common historical truth is that the ancient Olympic Games, despite their religious significance, featured events that were significantly more violent and less regulated than modern sports, often leading to severe injuries and even fatalities, particularly in combat sports like pancratium and boxing. The absence of strict rules and protective gear contributed directly to this brutality. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological impact of witnessing such violence on the Roman and Greek audiences, and whether it desensitized them to suffering or reinforce societal values of resilience and military prowess. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about the humble origins of this violence is the unspoken cultural acceptance of a winner's right to inflict lasting physical damage, almost as a form of proof of their absolute superiority beyond mere victory, transforming the opponent's broken body into a living trophy of the victor's dominance, even in events that weren't strictly combat sports. Imagine Lycurgus competing in the discus throw, an event that seems harmless enough. But if he or his rival suffered a severe muscle tear or a debilitating shoulder injury that ended their career, it wasn't seen as a tragedy, but as a natural consequence of pushing the limits. And the victor's achievement was somehow amplified by the opponent's brokenness. This wasn't about sportsmanship, it was about an almost Darwinian display of power, where your opponent's physical ruin underscored your triumph. This mentality extended beyond the combat events, seeping into the very spirit of competition. It's like winning a chess match, and then, as a sign of your strategic genius, you get to smash your opponent's chessboard and break their fingers. The running events, while seemingly straightforward, also carried significant risks. Ancient tracks were often made of compacted dirt, sometimes even stone, not cushioned rubber. Falls could lead to severe abrasions, broken bones, or head injuries. Imagine tripping during the stadium race, the ancient equivalent of a sprint, and falling face first onto a gravel track in Olympia, leaving you with lacerations and a concussion. Without proper medical care, something we'll touch on later, such injuries could lead to chronic pain or even early death. You'd think running would be safe, but they didn't have soft landings or even very good shoes back then. The chariot races, held in the hippodrome, were perhaps the most spectacular and dangerous events. Imagine being one of the charioteers, standing on a tiny platform pulled by 4 powerful horses, hurtling around a track with up to 40 other chariots, all vying for position. Collisions were frequent, often catastrophic. Chariots would smash into each other, horses would trip, and charioteers would be dragged, entangled in the reins, across the track, often to their agonizing death. The roar of the crowd in the hippodrome in Olympia would drown out the screams of the injured. The excitement of the race fueled by the ever-present possibility of horrific disaster. This wasn't just a race, it was a high-speed, multi-horse demolition derby with human lives on the line. Even the seemingly innocuous act of training contributed to this culture of violence. Athletes trained year-round under demanding conditions. Their bodies were pushed to their absolute limits, often beyond, leading to chronic injuries, deformities, and a reduced lifespan. They didn't have modern sports medicine, physical therapy, or even rudimentary injury prevention techniques. A pulled muscle today means rest and ice. A pulled muscle then could mean a permanent disability. You'd build up a tolerance to pain, a kind of grim resilience that would serve you well in the arena, but cost you dearly in the long run. The philosophical underpinnings of ancient Greek society also played a role. The Greeks admired the martial spirit, valor in battle, and physical toughness. Athletic contests were seen as an extension of military training, a way to prepare young men for the realities of warfare. The pain and violence endured in the arena were therefore not just tolerated, but celebrated as virtues, as demonstrations of the kind of spirit required to defend one's city-state. This pervasive belief system, deeply embedded in the humble origins of the games, meant that the violence was not an unfortunate side effect, but an integral part of their meaning. It was, in many ways, an aesthetic of suffering, where the beauty of a sculpted body was enhanced by the visible scars of its brutal journey. So, while the idea of the ancient Olympics as a symbol of peace and fair play might be romantic, the reality of their humble origins was steeped in a deeply disturbing culture of extreme physical risk and ritualized brutality. This era reminds us of the stark difference between modern sports and their ancient predecessors, proving that for millennia, human competition was often a far more primal, dangerous affair, leaving us truly grateful for safety regulations, medical support, and a more humane approach to athletic endeavor that define our games today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of the ancient Olympic Games, Let's gently return from the rough reality of the ancient Olympic Games' humble origins, where even seemingly benign competitions held the pervasive threat of serious injury and death, if we've just glimpsed the underlying brutality of all events. Tonight, we'll delve into the raw, unforgiving heart of their violence combat sports. No holds barred. You might imagine a referee stepping in, but for your ancient Greek ancestor, in the brutal arenas of Olympia or Nemea, the contests of boxing and pancration were truly no holds barred, where disfigurement and death were not just possible outcomes, but often unpunished consequences, making every bout a fight for survival, not just victory. Imagine yourself now a stocky, muscular athlete named Demoxenus from the city of Syracuse in Sicily, around 336 BCE. You've just entered the Scama, the designated area for combat sports, at the Nemean Games. The crowd, a roaring sea of faces, presses in around you. Your opponent, Crugus of Epidamnus, stands across from you, his body a coiled mass of muscle, his hands wrapped in leather thongs. There's no bell, no rounds, no judges to call a timeout. The fight begins with a nod, and you instantly know that this isn't about points or a gentle tap-out. This is about breaking your opponent, making him submit or rendering him unconscious. This is the horrifying truth of combat sports. No holds barred, where the primal instinct for survival overrides any notion of fairness. And the outcome could easily be a mangled face, a broken limb, or even a quiet, agonizing stillness on the blood-soaked earth. It's like stepping into a modern MMA cage. But imagine there are no weight classes, no gloves, no time limits. And the only rule is don't stop until someone drops permanently. The two most brutal combat sports in the ancient Olympics were boxing, pygmachia and pancration. Pancration. These were not sanitized displays, they were tests of endurance, pain tolerance, and sheer destructive power. And the rules, or rather the lack thereof, are what made them so chillingly violent. Let's start with ancient Greek boxing. Forget about modern boxing gloves, padded rings, or the concept of protecting the fighter. Ancient boxers wrapped their hands with himantes, strips of oxhide leather. Early himantes were relatively soft, offering minimal protection, but by the classical period, they evolved into harder, reinforced versions, sometimes studded with metal, known as cestus. These were less about protecting the boxer's hands and more about inflicting maximum damage on the opponent. Imagine being hit by a rock-hard fist wrapped in leather, possibly reinforced with metal. The impact would shatter bone, tear flesh, and cause horrific facial disfigurement. There were no rounds, no time limits, and no weight classes. The fight continued until one boxer either conceded defeat by raising a finger, was knocked unconscious, or died. There was no breaking up clinches, no standing 8 count. Boxers could aim for any part of the head or body. Imagine a fight lasting for hours under the scorching Greek sun in Olympia. Both fighters utterly exhausted, their faces swollen and bloody, teeth knocked out, noses broken, ears mangled. The goal was simple: knock out your opponent, or wear him down until he simply couldn't continue. Victory meant surviving, and often leaving your opponent a disfigured wreck. It truly sucked to be on the receiving end of a kystis. A common historical truth is that ancient Greek boxing and pancration were exceptionally violent combat sports with minimal rules, frequently resulting in severe injuries, permanent disfigurement, and death. The absence of weight classes, time limits, and protective gear, coupled with the legality of virtually any strike or submission, made these contests brutal tests of endurance and pain tolerance. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological impact of permanent facial disfigurement on ancient Greek athletes, and how much it was viewed as a badge of honor versus a social and personal burden after their athletic careers ended. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about the no-holds-barred nature of ancient Greek boxing is the accepted practice of deliberately targeting specific vulnerable facial areas, such as the nose and ears, not just for immediate damage, but to create grotesque disfigurement, often leading to a condition known as cauliflower ear from repeated blows or permanently broken noses, which became a visible, almost celebrated, mark of a veteran combat athlete. A gruesome badge of honor that underscored the brutal reality of their sport. Imagine training specifically to hit an opponent's nose with enough force to shatter it, or land repeated blows to the ear until it swelled and deformed. This wasn't accidental, it was part of the strategy. A boxer's mangled face, with its flattened nose and swollen, misshapen ears, wasn't hidden, it was displayed. A living testament to their endurance and willingness to suffer for victory. This acceptance of permanent disfigurement as a sign of prowess is chillingly revealing about the values of these combat sports. It's like a bodybuilder today trying to earn a trophy for how many bones they've broken in their own face. Pancration was even more extreme. The name itself means all power or all might, and it lived up to its name. It was a brutal mix of wrestling and boxing with virtually no rules. The only prohibitions were biting and eye gouging. Everything else was permitted: punching, kicking, grappling, joint locks, chokes, ground fighting, even striking a downed opponent. Imagine a modern mixed martial arts fight, but with no gloves, no weight classes, no rounds, no taps to end the fight, and the addition of kicks to the head and groin, all on hard ground. That was pancration. The danger of pancration was immense. Fighters would grapple, attempting to submit their opponents through painful joint locks that could break limbs, or chokeholds that could render them unconscious. Or worse, they would also strike with their fists, elbows, knees, and feet, aiming for vulnerable points. If an opponent was on the ground, they could be stomped, kicked, or pummeled until they surrendered or could no longer defend themselves. The infamous story of Eryxion of Figalea, who won the pancration at the Olympic Games in 564 BCE by breaking his opponent's toe, only to die from a chokehold at the very moment his opponent tapped out, perfectly encapsulates the sport's brutality and the lengths to which athletes would go for victory. His corpse was crowned the victor. Think about that for a moment, winning the Olympic gold. But being dead while they put the wreath on your head, the sheer athleticism required for these sports was incredible. These were not just brawlers. They were highly skilled fighters who combined strength, agility, and a deep understanding of human anatomy and leverage. But their skills were used to inflict maximum damage, not to score points or avoid injury. The crowd in the stadium at Olympia, or the stadium at Isthmia, would roar with approval at every crushing blow, every painful joint lock, every agonizing submission attempt. The suffering of the athletes was part of the spectacle, a testament to their arete, their courage, and their unbreakable will. The referees, known as Hellanodikai at the Olympic Games, had limited intervention. Their role was primarily to ensure the rules the few that existed were followed, and to stop a contest only when a fighter raised a finger in submission, or was clearly incapacitated. They would use switches or even whips to separate fighters who were cheating, like eye gouging. But they would not stop a fight just because one combatant was taking a horrific beating. The expectation was that the athlete himself, or his corner, would concede. But often, the drive for glory and the fear of shame meant fighters would endure punishment beyond belief. So, while the idea of ancient Greek athletes as paragons of physical perfection might be appealing, the reality of their combat sports, no holds barred, was a chilling testament to human endurance, pain, and the brutal consequences of minimal rules. This era reminds us of the raw, visceral nature of ancient competition, proving that for millennia, the pursuit of victory often came at the cost of permanent injury, disfigurement, and even life, leaving us truly grateful for safety regulations, medical interventions, and a more humane approach to athletic contests that define our sports today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of ancient Greek boxing and pancration, let's gently return from the raw, brutal heart of ancient Olympic combat sports, no holds barred, where boxing and pancration showcase the extreme violence inherent in the games. If we've just explored the terrifying lack of rules, tonight we'll delve into the ultimate chilling consequence fatalities, more than just a game. You might hope for rare accidents, but for your ancient Greek ancestor, participating in the Olympic Games meant facing a stark reality where death was not merely an occasional misfortune, but an accepted, inherent risk, proving that these were more than just a game. Imagine yourself now, a young man named Callias, from the city-state of Corinth, around 450 BCE. You've come to Olympia, not as a competitor yourself, but to watch your elder brother, a celebrated wrestler, vie for glory. The air hums with excitement, the scent of olive oil and sweat mingling with the dust. You see the strong bodies, the fierce determination. But then, during a particularly grueling wrestling match, your brother, locked in a desperate clinch, collapses. His opponent, perhaps unknowingly, held a submission for too long, or landed a throw that snapped his neck. A hush falls over the crowd, quickly replaced by murmurs. The Hellenodikai judges rush in. It's clear almost immediately your brother is still, utterly still. He's gone. This is the horrifying, yet strangely accepted, truth of fatalities. More than just a game, where the pursuit of athletic glory could end in a quiet, agonizing stillness on the sacred ground. A stark reminder that the stakes were impossibly high, and winning might come at the ultimate cost. It's like watching your favorite football team, but knowing that every tackle, every fall, carries a legitimate risk of a player dying right there on the field. And it's just part of the sport. Death in the ancient Olympic Games was a grim reality, far more common than modern audiences might assume. It wasn't always a dramatic, visible event like a decapitation in a Roman arena. Often, it was a quiet, insidious consequence of the extreme physical demands and the brutal nature of the competition. For the ancient Greeks, however, a death in the sacred games was not necessarily seen as a tragedy in the same way we would view it today. In some contexts, dying while striving for array day excellence in the games could even be viewed as a glorious, almost heroic end. This perspective meant that fatalities were more than just a game's unfortunate byproduct. They were woven into the very fabric of the event. The combat sports, particularly pancration and boxing, remember their chilling no-holds-barred brutality from Chapter 2, were the leading causes of death. The absence of rules like tapping out for submission, or stopping a fight due to overwhelming blows, meant that competitors often fought to the point of complete unconsciousness. Or worse, chokeholds, designed to cut off blood flow to the brain, could easily be held too long, leading to irreversible damage or death. Joint locks could snap bones and tear ligaments, causing internal bleeding or fatal shock. Repeated blows to the head, even without protective gear, caused concussions and brain trauma that could lead to immediate collapse or death days later. A common historical truth is that deaths were a recognized, though not desired, part of the ancient Olympic Games, particularly in the combat sports where minimal rules and the absence of protective gear allowed for lethal strikes and submissions. While not daily occurrences, fatalities were frequent enough to be documented and considered an inherent risk of participation. Historians still widely debate the precise number of fatalities in the ancient games. Given the limited and fragmented nature of surviving historical records, and the difficulty of distinguishing between immediate death in the arena and deaths occurring later due to injuries sustained during competition, a fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about fatalities, more than just a game, is the bizarre, almost mystical posthumous victory in cases where an athlete died during competition if their opponent conceded or was also incapacitated. The deceased athlete could still be declared the winner and even receive the olive wreath, their corpse adorned with the symbol of glory, underscoring the extreme, almost ritualistic value placed on victory even beyond life itself. Imagine our wrestler, Callias' brother, lying lifeless on the dusty ground of Olympia. His opponent, perhaps having just tapped out in agony from a broken toe, a grim callback to the story of Arichin from Chapter 2, is also declared unable to continue. In a macabre twist, The judges might award the victory to the deceased brother. His body would be carried out of the skama, not in shame, but in morbid triumph. The olive wreath placed upon his cold brow. This wasn't just a posthumous award, it was a societal declaration that victory, even in death, was the ultimate achievement. Lending an almost supernatural gravity to the dangers of the games, it's like getting a Nobel Prize after you've already, stopped existing, purely because you technically outlasted your rival, even if you did so by literally expiring first, beyond the direct combat. Other events carried their own significant, often fatal, risks. The chariot races were notorious for their high casualty rates. As we touched on earlier, collisions were frequent and spectacular. A charioteer, tangled in the reins after a crash, could be dragged for long distances by panicked horses, suffering horrific injuries or being trampled to death. The sheer speed and chaos of dozens of chariots vying for position in the narrow hippodrome in Delphi or Olympia meant that an accident could easily become a deadly pileup. A horrifying scene for the thousands of spectators. Imagine the thundering hooves, the splintering wood, and the screams of horses and men, all culminating in a chaotic, bloody mess. This wasn't just dangerous, it was an accepted, almost expected part of the entertainment. Even seemingly safer events like the long jump or discus throw could result in fatal accidents. A misstep during a jump could lead to a catastrophic fall, a broken neck, or a severe head injury on the hard ground. A discus, thrown incorrectly or losing its trajectory, could strike a spectator or even another athlete with lethal force. These weren't padded fields or carefully controlled environments. The athletes pushed their bodies to the absolute limits of human endurance and performance, often without adequate warm-up or understanding of biomechanics, leading to injuries that, without modern medical care, could quickly turn deadly. You might think, how dangerous can a discus be? But imagine a heavy, sharp-edged disc flying off course at high speed, striking an unprotected head. It truly sucked when your pursuit of glory could end in such a sudden, brutal fashion. The Roman fascination with extreme competition, as the games evolved and later became influenced by Roman tastes, only intensified the acceptance of fatalities. While the Greeks initially revered athletic excellence, the Romans, with their love for gladiatorial combat, had an even higher tolerance, if not an outright appetite, for violence and death as spectacle. Though the Olympics remained Greek in character, the broader Hellenistic and Roman worlds continued to host games where such fatalities were simply part of the package, a testament to the competitor's ultimate sacrifice. The lack of effective emergency medical care further exacerbated the risk of death from injuries that might be treatable today. A severe head injury, internal bleeding from a powerful blow, or a complex fracture that became infected, all would likely result in death in ancient Greece. There were no paramedics, no ambulances, no emergency rooms. A wounded athlete would be carried off the field and, at best, receive rudimentary care from a iatros physician who likely had very limited knowledge of trauma surgery or infection control. A simple, untreated infection from a scrape could lead to gangrene and death within days. So, while the idea of the ancient Olympics as a symbol of athletic purity might persist, the stark reality of fatalities, more than just a game, was an undeniable truth. This era reminds us of the profound difference in the value placed on human life and safety in ancient times compared to today, proving that for millennia, the pursuit of victory often demanded the ultimate sacrifice, leaving us truly grateful for modern safety protocols, advanced medical care, and a shared societal understanding that human lives are infinitely more valuable than any trophy. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of death in the ancient Olympic Games, let's gently return from the chilling reality of fatalities, more than just a game, where death was an accepted, inherent risk in the brutal contests of the ancient Olympics. If we've just confronted the ultimate consequence of competition, tonight we'll delve into the relentless physical toll taken even before the arena training's torment. Bodies pushed to breaking. You might imagine invigorating workouts, But for your ancient Greek ancestor, preparing for the games involved training's torment. A grueling regimen that relentlessly pushed bodies to breaking, mirroring the very violence of the contests themselves, and often inflicting permanent damage. Imagine yourself. Now, a young man named Milo, from the city of Croton in Magna Graecia, southern Italy, renowned for its athletes, around 520 BCE. You are not yet a champion, but you dream of Olympic glory every single day, from before dawn until dusk. Your life is a relentless cycle of physical exertion. You don't have fancy gyms with cushioned floors or advanced nutritional supplements. Your diet is mostly coarse bread, cheese, dried figs, and a bit of meat, consumed quickly between punishing drills. You lift heavy stones, run endless laps in the blazing sun, wrestle endlessly with larger, stronger opponents, and box with crude, unpadded hand wraps. Your muscles constantly ache, your joints throb, and your hands are calloused and bleeding. Sleep is a fleeting reprieve from exhaustion. This is the unromanticized truth of training's torment. A brutal, ceaseless effort that pushed bodies to breaking. A deliberate act of self-violence that laid the groundwork for the brutal spectacle of the games. It's like being in a year-round, hyper-intense military boot camp, but instead of preparing for war, you're just getting ready to punch someone else in the face. Repeatedly, the ancient Greek athletes, particularly those training for the combat sports, engaged in regimens that would shock modern sports scientists. Their training was not about injury prevention or peak performance through nuanced periodization. It was about building raw strength, extreme endurance, and an almost superhuman tolerance for pain. This often meant training's torment, pushing the human body far beyond its natural limits, leading to inevitable wear and tear and permanent damage. Their routines were far from gentle. Wrestlers and pancratiasts spent hours grappling in the palaestra, a wrestling school, often covered in olive oil and dust. Imagine being repeatedly thrown to the ground, day after day, week after week. The impact on joints, bones, and cartilage would be immense, leading to chronic inflammation and early onset arthritis, a condition that would plague them in old age. As we touched on in Body's Betrayal from our Roman series, they didn't have cushioned mats. The ground was hard-packed earth, sometimes even stone. Every throw was a jarring impact, every fall a brutal shock. A common historical truth is that ancient Greek athletic training was incredibly rigorous and often physically damaging, involving relentless exertion, harsh diets, and a lack of understanding of biomechanics or injury prevention, leading to chronic injuries, deformities, and often shortened athletic careers. The athletes' bodies were pushed to their breaking point to achieve peak performance. Historians still widely debate the precise training methods used by specific famous athletes like Milo of Croton, as many accounts are anecdotal or legendary, making it difficult to fully reconstruct their daily routines with scientific certainty. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about this training's torment and the brutal reality of bodies pushed to breaking is the deliberate practice of overtraining without rest days, or bulk eating massive quantities of meat, if affordable in the belief that sheer volume of food and exercise, regardless of scientific principles, would lead to unstoppable strength, often resulting in digestive issues, muscle strain, and chronic fatigue that paradoxically hindered true peak performance. Imagine Milo, after hours of lifting heavy stones, being told to eat pounds of meat and cheese, forcing down more food than his body could comfortably digest, and then being expected to train just as hard the next day with no recovery time. The ancient athletes often believed that more is better when it came to both food and exercise. They didn't understand the concept of muscle recovery, the need for balanced nutrition, or the importance of rest days. This relentless pushing, without adequate recovery, would lead to constant fatigue, increased susceptibility to injury, and a body that was perpetually inflamed and under stress. It's like driving a car at maximum speed, non-stop, for years, without ever changing the oil or checking the engine, just hoping it keeps running until it explodes. Boxers, to harden their hands and condition their bodies for pain, would sometimes hit hardened surfaces or engage in endless sparring bouts, leading to broken knuckles, scarred hands, and constant bruising. They also develop specific punching techniques to maximize impact, knowing that their himantes, remember those brutal hand wraps from Chapter 2, were designed to deliver devastating blows. This wasn't about finesse, it was about blunt force trauma, and they had to train their bodies to give and receive that trauma. Diet played a role too. While not as sophisticated as modern sports nutrition, athletes sometimes engaged in specific, often extreme, eating habits. Accounts suggest some, like Milo, consumed enormous quantities of meat, believing it made them stronger. But this could lead to digestive problems and imbalances. They essentially ate to bulk up, not necessarily for optimal health. Imagine force-feeding yourself massive amounts of unprocessed food, day after day, just to gain weight, and then feeling sluggish and uncomfortable during your intense training. Beyond direct combat, even runners and jumpers pushed their bodies with intense, repetitive exercises, running barefoot or with minimal footwear on uneven terrain, performing countless jumps on hard ground, and throwing heavy implements like the discus and javelin for hours, all led to specific, often chronic injuries, shin splints, tendinitis, stress fractures, and joint damage would be common. These weren't temporary setbacks, they were often permanent afflictions that stayed with them for life. You develop a distinctive limp or a perpetually stiff shoulder long after your athletic career was over. The training was also often carried out under the watchful, and often harsh, eye of a paid-to-tribes athletic trainer. These trainers were relentless, pushing their charges with little sympathy for pain or exhaustion. Physical discipline was common. Athletes might be whipped or beaten for perceived laziness or poor performance. This added a layer of psychological torment to the physical strain. Imagine being utterly exhausted, your body screaming in protest, and then facing the threat of a public flogging if you don't push harder. It truly sucked to be constantly on the verge of physical and mental collapse. Just for the chance at glory, the long-term consequences of this training's torment were severe. Many ancient athletes retired with chronic pain. Disfigurements, think of those cauliflower ears from Chapter 2, and debilitating injuries that would make simple daily tasks difficult. Their bodies, once paragons of strength and speed, became worn-out machines long before their time. Their pursuit of glory in their youth often meant a lifetime of physical suffering in their later years. You might gain an olive wreath, but you often lost the ability to walk without a limp. So, while the idea of ancient Greek athletes as models of healthy living might be appealing, the reality of training's torment, a grueling regimen that relentlessly pushed bodies to breaking, was a profound and often painful truth. This era reminds us of the stark difference between ancient and modern approaches to physical conditioning, proving that for millennia, the path to athletic excellence was often paved with self-inflicted violence and permanent bodily damage, leaving us truly grateful for modern sports science, injury prevention, and a more holistic understanding of athletic well-being that define our training methods today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of ancient Olympic preparation, let's gently return from the relentless training's torment. Where ancient Greek athletes pushed their bodies to breaking in preparation for the games, often incurring permanent damage. If we've just explored the self-inflicted violence of training, tonight we'll delve into how these perfected, yet brutalized forms were deployed in the arena weaponized bodies. The dark side of glory. You might envision graceful strength, but for your ancient Greek ancestor, a champion athlete was one who had transformed their very being into a weaponized body, embodying the dark side of glory, using their honed physique not just for victory, but for devastating, often cruel impact on their opponents. Imagine yourself. Now, a prominent athlete named Theagens of Thasos, around 480 BCE, famed for your incredible strength and prowess in both boxing and pankration. You stand in the Skama at Olympia, bathed in the afternoon sun, the scent of dust and the murmur of the crowd filling the air. Years of training's torment, a brutal reality we explored in Chapter 4, have sculpted your muscles into dense, unyielding cords. Your hands, conditioned to absorb and deliver bone-shattering impacts, are wrapped tightly in himantes, those cruel hand wraps we discussed in Chapter 2. Your opponent looks at you, not just at another competitor, but at a living, breathing instrument of destruction. Every flex of your bicep, every tautness in your shoulder, every ripple in your back is a testament to your ability to inflict pain. This is the chilling reality of a weaponized body, a physique honed not for aesthetics alone, but for maximum kinetic energy and devastating impact, revealing the dark side of glory where human potential is bent towards controlled violence. It's like admiring a beautifully crafted samurai sword, not just for its artistry, but for its cold, efficient ability to sever bone and flesh. The ancient Greek ideal of the kalokagathia, the harmonious blend of physical beauty kalos and moral excellence agathos, often comes to mind when we think of Greek athletes. Sculptures depict perfectly muscled, graceful figures. However, the reality of the competitive arena, especially in combat sports, demanded a far more pragmatic and indeed brutal application of this physical perfection. An athlete's body was not merely a vessel for arete excellence. It was meticulously sculpted, hardened, and adapted to become a highly effective instrument of physical domination and often severe injury. This transformation represents the dark side of glory. Consider the musculature of ancient boxers and pancratias. Their shoulders would be massively developed from countless punches and throws. Their necks would be thick and strong, trained to resist chokeholds and absorb blows. Their hands and forearms, hardened from hitting heavy bags and sparring without padding, would be capable of delivering concussive force. These were not just strong bodies, they were bodies that had adapted to inflict and withstand extreme blunt force trauma. Imagine trying to make a fist when your knuckles are permanently swollen and gnarled from years of hitting solid objects. This was their reality. A common historical truth is that ancient Greek athletes, particularly those in combat sports, deliberately cultivated physiques designed for inflicting and withstanding extreme physical trauma, transforming their bodies into effective weapons through rigorous, often damaging, training. This utilitarian approach to physical development contrasted sharply with modern ideals of athletic safety and long-term health. Historians still widely debate the precise anatomical and physiological adaptations achieved by ancient athletes, and how much their diet and training methods contributed to their legendary strength versus merely accelerating their physical deterioration. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about these weaponized bodies and the truly chilling aspect of the dark side of glory is the intentional cultivation of a specific kind of fighting posture, or gait, designed to maximize defensive solidity and offensive impact, often leading to a distinct, almost unnatural way of moving outside the arena, permanently marking them as combatants, akin to a modern wrestler's perpetually stiff neck or a boxer's shuffling gait. Imagine watching Theogens walk through the streets of Olympia. He wouldn't move with a fluid grace. Instead, his posture might be slightly hunched, his shoulders forward, his neck pulled in a stance designed to protect vital organs and absorb blows. His weight distribution might be subtly shifted, always ready to pivot for a punch or throw. This wasn't just about athletic performance in the fight. It was about transforming their very everyday locomotion, subtly altering their natural human movement into something more akin to a tank, always prepared for impact. It's like a person who drives a bulldozer for a living suddenly starts walking with that same heavy, deliberate, earth-moving stride everywhere. Even to the grocery store, the sheer mass and density of these athletes' bodies also became a weapon. Wrestlers and pancratius. With no weight classes, remember that chilling detail from Chapter 2. Aim to gain as much muscle mass as possible. A heavier, denser body meant more power in a throw, more force in a punch, and greater resistance to being moved or thrown by an opponent. They weren't concerned with speed or agility in the way modern lightweight fighters are. Their advantage lay in overwhelming physical presence. Imagine a modern heavyweight boxer being told to gain another 50 pounds of pure muscle, just to be even more immovable. The focus on core strength and balance was also paramount. A powerful core allowed for devastating throws, solid resistance to being thrown, and the ability to maintain balance while delivering blows. Every muscle, from the calves to the trapezius, was trained not just for strength, but for its specific function in overpowering an opponent. Their bodies were truly machines, designed for a single, brutal purpose, even outside the combat sports. The athlete's body was a tool for victory that could also inflict harm. In discus throwing, the immense rotational force generated could, on a misthrow, send the heavy discus hurtling into the crowd, a dangerous possibility we touched upon in Chapter 3. In javelin throwing, the sharpened tip of the spear could be lethal if it strayed from its intended path. These athletes possessed tremendous kinetic energy that, when misdirected, could be incredibly destructive. This wasn't just about athletic skill, it was about controlling a potentially lethal force. It truly sucked when your body, your very instrument of glory, was also a constant source of potential danger to yourself and others. The psychological aspect of cultivating a weaponized body cannot be overstated. An athlete didn't just train their muscles, they trained their minds to accept and inflict violence. They had to overcome any natural aversion to harming another human being, to see their opponent not as a fellow competitor, but as an obstacle to be overcome, physically crushed if necessary. This mental hardening was as much a part of their training as any physical drill, contributing to the dark side of glory. They internalized the idea that their purpose was to dominate, to break, to win at all costs. The public spectacle further reinforced this. The crowd's roar, their hunger for decisive, often brutal, victories, spurred the athletes to push further. The standing ovation wasn't for a graceful maneuver, but often for a devastating punch or a bone-crushing submission. The Roman influence, as the games continued through later periods, only intensified this appetite for visceral combat, making the athletic body not just a tool, but a performer in a violent, almost ritualistic drama. So, while the idea of ancient Greek athletes as symbols of graceful perfection might be romantic, the reality of their weaponized bodies, honed for devastating impact and embodying the dark side of glory, was a stark and unsettling truth. This era reminds us of how human potential can be channeled towards both beauty and brutality, proving that for millennia, the pursuit of athletic victory often demanded a transformation into an instrument of controlled violence, leaving us truly grateful for modern sports that prioritize athlete safety, fair play, and a more humane definition of excellence that define our games today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of ancient Olympic bodies, let's gently return from the stark reality of weaponized bodies, where ancient Greek athletes embodied the dark side of glory through their brutal physical prowess. If we've just explored how they prepared themselves for violence, tonight we'll delve into the harsh consequences of any misstep or perceived infraction. Discipline's cruelty, public flogging, and shame? You might expect a warning or a yellow card, but for your ancient Greek ancestor, a competitor at Olympia or Delphi, facing discipline's cruelty meant the very real threat of public flogging and an inescapable shame that could linger long after the physical pain subsided. Imagine yourself, now, a young runner named Philo from the rugged region of Arcadia, around 380 BCE. You've trained relentlessly, enduring all that training's torment we discussed in Chapter 4, making the arduous journey to Olympia, dreaming of a swift victory in the Dolichos, the long-distance race. The tension is palpable. During the race, in a moment of desperate fatigue, you subtly trip an opponent who is gaining on you, a move barely noticeable in the chaos. But the Hellenodikai judges, with their eagle eyes, spot it. The race ends, and your name is called out, not for victory, but for a public accusation. Before the thousands of spectators, you are led to a designated spot. Your tunic is stripped from your back. The whips come out. This is the horrifying truth of discipline's cruelty. the raw, unadulterated pain of public flogging, and the searing, indelible mark of shame that branded not just your body, but your very soul in the eyes of all Greece. It's like being caught cheating in the World Series. But instead of being fined or suspended, you're publicly whipped on the pitcher's mound, live on national television. While your family watches from the stands, the ancient Olympic Games, despite their sacred nature, were governed by strict, often brutal rules enforced by the Hellenodikai. These judges were not just arbitrators, they were solemn guardians of athletic and moral integrity, invested with immense authority, including the power to inflict corporal punishment. Their role was to ensure fair play, but their methods were far from what we would consider just or humane today. Discipline's cruelty was a public spectacle in itself. If an athlete committed a foul anything from false starts in a race, to biting or eye gouging in combat sports, the very few rules from Chapter 2, to attempting to bribe an opponent, or even disrespecting the officials, they could face immediate and severe punishment. This often involved public flogging. Imagine being lashed repeatedly with a whip in front of a vast crowd, your screams echoing through the stadium. The physical pain would be immense, but the psychological pain of humiliation, of being publicly shamed, would be even more profound. A common historical truth is that strict and often brutal corporal punishments, including public flogging, were administered to ancient Olympic athletes by the Hellenodikai for various infractions, underscoring the severity with which cheating or rule-breaking was regarded in the sacred games. This public humiliation served as a powerful deterrent. Historians still widely debate the long-term psychological effects of public shaming on ancient Greek athletes, and how much it contributed to societal obedience versus fostering deep resentment or lasting trauma. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about this discipline's cruelty and the indelible mark of shame is the practice of publicly inscribing the names of disgraced athletes, along with their offenses, on stone monuments or plaques displayed at Olympia itself, often funded by the fines imposed upon them or their city-states, literally cementing their dishonor in the sacred precinct for eternity, ensuring that their transgression would be remembered long after the physical pain of flogging faded. Imagine Philo, having endured his public flogging, then discovering that his name, along with the precise description of his foul, would be carved into stone, visible to every visitor at Olympia. Perhaps for centuries, these Zanes statues, monuments of shame, served as a perpetual reminder of fallen athletes and the consequences of moral and athletic transgression. It wasn't just a punishment for the moment, it was a permanent blot on your family's and your city-state's honor, a legacy of disgrace etched in stone. It's like having a permanent scarlet letter, but it's carved onto a monument in the center of town, explaining exactly why you're a cheat for your great-great-grandchildren to see. Beyond the floggings, fines were also a common punishment. These fines, often substantial, were used to erect the aforementioned Zanes statues, which depicted Zeus, the patron god of the games. Each statue bore an inscription detailing the athlete's offense and serving as a warning to others. This financial penalty not only impacted the athlete but also his city-state, as the city was often expected to pay the fine if the athlete couldn't. This meant the shame extended beyond the individual to their entire community, further emphasizing the public nature of the disgrace. Imagine your hometown having to pay a hefty fine and erect a statue that forever proclaims, "Here stands the shame of our city, caused by our cheating athlete." The concept of shame, eidos, or time, was incredibly powerful in ancient Greek society. Public dishonor was often considered worse than death. For an athlete whose status and identity were so tied to their physical prowess and their city's honor, being publicly flogged and branded with shame was a devastating blow. It could ruin their reputation, strip them of future opportunities, and make them an outcast in their own community. Even if they physically recovered, the psychological scars would remain. Consider the consequences for a Roman athlete, especially in later periods when the games continued under Roman influence. While their perspective on public spectacle might have been slightly different, more on that in Chapter 8, The concept of discipline and the importance of adhering to rules would still be paramount. A Roman athlete, perhaps from a military background, might face even harsher, more formalized discipline for infractions, reflecting the strict discipline of the Roman legions. The humiliation would still be profound, as their personal honor was a direct reflection on their family and patron. The harshness of this discipline's cruelty also extended to those who attempted to manipulate the games, such as trainers or even city officials who might try to bribe athletes or judges. Such individuals could also face severe penalties, including fines, public humiliation, and exclusion from future games. This underlined the sacred nature of the games and the seriousness with which any attempt to corrupt them was viewed. The Hellenodikai were not to be trifled with. Their authority was absolute. It truly sucked when your integrity, or lack thereof, was publicly flayed for all to see. So, while the idea of fair play and noble competition might be associated with the ancient Olympics, the grim reality of discipline's cruelty, the brutal enforcement through public flogging, and the indelible mark of shame were ever-present threats. This era reminds us of the stark difference in judicial and penal practices compared to today, proving that for millennia, the maintenance of order and integrity in competitive arenas often came at the cost of immense personal suffering and public humiliation, leaving us truly grateful for modern legal systems, athlete protection, and a more humane approach to disciplinary actions that define our sports today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of ancient Olympic justice, let's gently return from the searing reality of discipline's cruelty, where public flogging and shame enforced the rules of the ancient Olympics with brutal efficacy. If we've just explored the external consequences of breaking the rules, tonight we'll delve into the internal, relentless cost paid by every competitor. Even the victor's the price of victory: blood, sweat, and broken bones. You might envision effortless triumph, but for your ancient Greek ancestor, achieving Olympic glory meant paying the price of victory, enduring a lifetime of blood, sweat, and broken bones, and suffering permanent injuries for a fleeting moment of honor. Imagine yourself, now, a champion wrestler named Euthymus of Locri from southern Italy around 472 BCE. You've just defeated your final opponent in Olympia, winning your third consecutive Olympic wreath. The crowd roars, olive leaves rain down upon you, and you are paraded through the stadium, a living legend. You feel the surge of triumph, the intoxicating rush of arete, but as the adrenaline fades, a different reality sets in. Your shoulder, dislocated and reset countless times during years of training's torment. A brutal memory from Chapter 4, aches with a dull, persistent throb. Your knuckles are permanently gnarled from years of boxing. Your nose a crooked testament to countless blows, a stark reminder of those weaponized bodies from Chapter 5. Every joint in your body whispers tales of countless falls and bone-jarring impacts. This is the quiet, enduring truth of the price of victory, paid not just in blood and sweat during your relentless efforts, but in broken bones and permanent physical damage that will be your constant companion for the rest of your days. It's like climbing Mount Everest, reaching the summit, but losing all your fingers and toes to frostbite, knowing that every step for the rest of your life will be a painful reminder of your triumph. The pursuit of Olympic glory in ancient Greece was not a gentle endeavor. Unlike today, where professional athletes are surrounded by teams of physical therapists, sports doctors, and nutritionists dedicated to injury prevention and rapid recovery, ancient athletes had almost none of these supports. The result was that the price of victory was almost always paid in permanent physical damage. Blood was a common sight in the ancient games. In boxing and pancration, blows to the face and body frequently caused lacerations, internal bleeding, and broken bones that would pierce the skin. The dust of the Skama combat arena would often be stained red. Even in wrestling, the intense friction of skin against skin, or the violent contortions of limbs that could lead to abrasions and minor bleeding. This wasn't just a metaphor, it was a literal consequence of intense physical combat with minimal protection. Remember those unforgiving Hamantes from Chapter 2? A common historical truth is that winning an Olympic event in ancient Greece often came at the cost of severe, lifelong physical injuries, including chronic pain, disfigurement, and impaired mobility, due to the extreme nature of the sports, the brutal training regimens, and the complete absence of modern medical care or rehabilitation. The glory was immense, but the personal physical sacrifice was profound. Historians still widely debate the long-term health outcomes and average lifespans of ancient Olympic champions compared to the general population. Given the limited bioarchaeological evidence and the inherent selection bias of those strong enough to compete, a fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about the price of victory and the enduring reality of blood, sweat, and broken bones is the curious phenomenon of athlete's foot. A range of chronic orthopedic deformities and unusual skeletal growths found in the foot and ankle bones of ancient athletes' remains, caused by the repetitive, high-impact stress of training and competition on hard, unforgiving surfaces without supportive footwear, making every step a potential source of chronic pain long after their careers ended. Imagine Euthymus celebrating his victory, but his feet, hidden within his sandals, are a map of past torments, enlarged bone spurs where tendons constantly pulled, stress fractures that never healed properly, and an overall distortion from years of pounding on compacted earth and stone. These weren't just temporary aches. These were permanent architectural changes to their skeletal structure, silently screaming about the relentless abuse. It's like a beautifully crafted vase that, upon closer inspection, is covered in tiny, unfixable cracks from being constantly dropped, all to win a beauty contest. Sweat was, of course, omnipresent. The athletes trained and competed under the intense Mediterranean sun, pushing their bodies to the limits of endurance. Dehydration and heat stroke would have been constant risks, particularly in the longer running events or extended combat bouts. The sheer volume of sweat, mingled with dust and olive oil, became a symbol of their relentless effort, their absolute commitment to the grueling path to victory. But this constant exertion without proper rehydration strategies, no Gatorade back then took a toll on their internal systems, contributing to long-term fatigue and potentially kidney issues. But the most devastating part of the price of victory came in the form of broken bones and other severe, permanent injuries. Wrestlers and Pancratius suffered from dislocations, fractures, and torn ligaments. Boxers, as we know, endured broken noses, jaws, and shattered teeth. Even in events like the long jump, a bad landing could lead to broken ankles or knees. These were not injuries that healed perfectly. Without modern surgical techniques, effective pain management, or physical therapy, a broken bone might set improperly, leading to lifelong deformities, chronic pain, and limited mobility. A torn ligament could mean a perpetually unstable joint. Imagine the reality of living with such injuries. A champion runner might develop a permanent limp from a badly healed leg fracture. A celebrated boxer might be left with a disfigured face, chronic headaches from past concussions, and agonizing arthritis in every joint of his hands. These were not just physical inconveniences. They could impact their ability to work, linking back to work's end from Chapter 6. Their social standing statuses slip from Chapter 5, and their overall quality of life. The glory might last a lifetime in song and story, but the pain would last even longer in their bones. It truly sucked when your triumph came with a permanent side of agony. The lack of understanding about proper post-injury care meant that even minor injuries could become chronic. A simple bruise could become a hematoma. A small cut could lead to a life-threatening infection. Athletes often had to continue training and competing through pain, which would only worsen existing injuries and lead to new ones. This relentless pushing, driven by the desire for glory and the expectations of their city-states, ensured that few, if any, athletes emerged from their careers physically unscathed. So, while the idea of ancient Olympic glory shines brightly in history, the profound reality of the price of victory, paid in blood, sweat, and broken bones and permanent injuries, was a darker, inescapable truth. This era reminds us of the profound physical sacrifice that came with athletic excellence in ancient times, proving that for millennia, the pursuit of ultimate triumph often demanded a lifetime of physical suffering, leaving us truly grateful for modern sports medicine, rehabilitation, and a more humane approach to athlete welfare that define our games today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of the costs of ancient Olympic glory, let's gently return from the enduring pain of the price of victory, where ancient Greek athletes paid in blood, sweat, and broken bones for their fleeting glory. If we've just explored the physical toll on the competitors, tonight we'll shift our gaze to the audience and how their presence fueled the very brutality of the game spectacle's appetite. Audiences craving carnage. You might imagine appreciative fans, but for your ancient Greek and later Roman ancestor, attending the games meant being part of a vast spectacle's appetite, a collective hunger for drama, dominance, and often unbridled carnage, pushing the boundaries of violence even further. Imagine yourself, now, a wealthy merchant named Gaius, from the bustling city of Rome, around 150 CE. You've traveled to Olympia, not just out of piety, but out of a deep-seated Roman curiosity and a desire to witness the famed Greek games. You take your seat in the stadium, the vast stone tiers packed with tens of thousands of spectators Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Gauls, all united by a common thirst for entertainment. The sun beats down. In the Skama combat arena, two Pancratius begin their brutal dance. A fighter lands a devastating kick to the groin. The crowd roars, a primal, collective sound. Later, a boxer's nose is shattered with a sickening crunch of familiar consequence. Remember, from Chapter 2. Again, the roar swells. Louder this time, a collective exhalation of excitement and morbid fascination. This is the unvarnished truth of spectacle's appetite. The insatiable hunger of audiences craving carnage, where the suffering and vulnerability of the athletes became a thrilling, almost addictive component of the entertainment. It's like attending a modern sporting event, but the entire stadium is subtly hoping for a fight to break out, a serious injury, anything to raise the stakes and pump the adrenaline. The role of the audience in the ancient Olympic Games, and indeed in all Pan-Hellenic and later Roman-influenced athletic contests, was not merely passive observation. The crowd was an active participant in the atmosphere of violence. Their cheers, their collective gasps, their roars of approval for brutal blows or daring maneuvers, all fed into the competitive drive of the athletes and the escalating nature of the violence. The spectacle's appetite was enormous. Unlike modern sports audiences who might recoil at severe injury, ancient audiences often viewed pain and endurance as a testament to arete, excellence, and virtue. Witnessing an athlete endure immense suffering, push through agonizing pain, and still emerge victorious was seen as a powerful demonstration of character, worthy of fervent admiration. This cultural lens meant that what we would consider disturbing violence, they saw as a compelling, even heroic display of human limits. A common historical truth is that the audiences of the ancient Olympic Games and other Roman-era athletic contests actively contributed to the brutal atmosphere by demonstrating a clear preference for dramatic, often violent, outcomes in combat sports and chariot races. Their enthusiasm for displays of endurance and aggression implicitly encouraged athletes to push beyond safe limits, transforming suffering into spectacle. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological mechanisms behind this ancient appetite for violence and entertainment, and how much it reflected societal values versus a primal human fascination with power and mortality. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about spectacle's appetite and the profound extent to which audiences craved carnage is the curious ritual of audience participation through the collective noise and body language. Where synchronized gasps or chants during moments of extreme brutality or imminent danger could create a palpable wave of energy that directly fueled the athlete's willingness to inflict and endure more pain, almost as if the crowd's collective will was physically drawing the violence out of the arena. Imagine the stadium in Olympia as a massive, living entity. When a wrestler had an opponent in a chokehold, or a boxer was delivering a series of bone-shattering blows, think about those weaponized bodies from Chapter 5. The audience wasn't just cheering. Their collective intake of breath, their guttural roars, or their rhythmic stomping, or even their agitated shuffling could create a tangible pressure, a silent command for more. It wasn't just cheering for a good play, it was almost a ritualistic incantation, demanding the ultimate display of dominance. It's like a stadium full of people all shouting, "Finish him," in unison during a fighting game. But the consequences are horrifyingly real, and the players actually hear them. The Romans, in particular, brought an even greater appetite for violence to the athletic arena. While the Greek games were rooted in religious festivals, the Roman sensibility, honed by centuries of gladiatorial combat and public executions, had a far higher tolerance, and often an active craving, for bloodshed and death as entertainment. When Roman influence expanded throughout the Greek world, and especially as Roman emperors became patrons of the games, the desire for increasingly brutal spectacles began to subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, influence the nature of the contests. Even chariot races, already inherently dangerous. Remember the fatalities we discussed in Chapter 3? Became even more thrilling due to the audience's bloodthirsty anticipation of crashes. The audience would bet heavily, not just on who would win, but on whether a driver would survive, or if a spectacular wreck would occur. The drama of life and death unfolding at breakneck speed was a major draw. Imagine the collective gasp as chariots collided, sending horses and men tumbling. Then the erupting roar of excitement from the stands if a charioteer was dragged, entangled in his reins, across the dust. The Hellenodikai, those stern judges we met in Chapter 6 who dished out discipline's cruelty, while tasked with upholding the rules, were also keenly aware of the audience's preferences. While they would prevent outright cheating, they rarely intervened to stop a fight simply because one participant was clearly overwhelmed or suffering immense pain. Unless a direct concession was made, the entertainment value of the prolonged struggle, the agonizing endurance, was paramount. It truly sucked when your agony was someone else's entertainment. The athletes themselves were not immune to this pressure. Performing for such a vast, demanding audience, their own desire for glory was intertwined with the knowledge that a truly brutal, decisive victory would earn them the loudest cheers, the most fervent admiration. The roar of the crowd could push them to inflict more damage, to fight through even greater pain, to extend a submission hold just a little longer, all for that intoxicating surge of collective approval. Their lives and the lives of their opponents were laid bare for the public's consumption. So, while the idea of noble competition might dominate our modern view of the ancient Olympics, the profound reality of spectacle's appetite, an insatiable hunger of audiences craving carnage, was a powerful and often disturbing force. This era reminds us of the darker aspects of human entertainment throughout history, proving that for millennia, the boundaries of acceptable violence in sport were constantly pushed by the demands of the crowd, leaving us truly grateful for modern safety regulations, protective gear, and a more humane approach to athletic entertainment that define our sporting events today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of ancient Olympic audiences, let's gently return from the fervent embrace of spectacle's appetite, where audiences craving carnage directly influence the brutality of the ancient Olympic Games. If we've just explored how the crowd fueled the violence within the arena, tonight we'll broaden our view and consider how this inherent brutality wasn't just confined to the stadium beyond the arena. Echoes of violence. You might think of the games as a separate world, but for your ancient Greek or Roman ancestor, the violence ingrained in the contest was a powerful echo of violence that permeated their daily lives, reflecting and reinforcing the broader, often brutal realities of ancient society. Imagine yourself now, a citizen of Athens around 400 BCE, perhaps a farmer named Theron, living in the Attic countryside. You've heard tales of the incredible strength and ferocity of Olympic champions. Their weaponized bodies a chilling concept from Chapter 5, a testament to brutal training and combat. But your own life is also a constant struggle against a harsh reality. You witness public punishments for petty crimes, perhaps even a flogging in the agora, a grim echo of discipline's cruelty from Chapter 6. You know that disputes with neighbors can escalate quickly into physical altercations, and the ever-present threat of warfare, requiring every able-bodied man to be ready to fight and perhaps die, looms large. The same values of physical dominance, endurance, and a willingness to inflict and withstand pain that make an Olympic champion are also the virtues that make a good soldier or a respected citizen in a society where physical might often translate into survival and status. This is the pervasive truth of Beyond the Arena, echoes of violence, where the brutality of the games was not an isolated phenomenon, but a powerful mirror reflecting the deep-seated, often harsh, realities of ancient life, permeating every aspect of their world. It's like watching a violent movie and realizing that the characters' struggles and the underlying rules of their world are identical to your own daily life. The violence seen in the Olympic Games was not an anomaly. It was a concentrated, ritualized expression of a pervasive cultural value. Ancient Greek and Roman societies were, by modern standards, inherently violent. Life was precarious. Disputes were often settled physically, and the specter of warfare was ever present. The games, therefore, served as a microcosm, a stylized representation of this broader societal ethos. Consider the role of warfare. Ancient Greece was characterized by independent city-states constantly vying for power, leading to frequent conflicts. Roman society was built on military conquest and the maintenance of a vast empire through force. Physical prowess, the ability to fight, to endure pain, and to inflict it upon an enemy, was not just admired, it was essential for individual survival and the security of the state. The athlete's training, all that training's torment from Chapter 4, directly mirrored military preparation. A skilled wrestler or boxer was not just an entertainer. He was a potential hoplite, a legionary, ready to apply his combat skills on the battlefield. A common historical truth is that the violence of the ancient Olympic Games was not an isolated phenomenon, but deeply interwoven with the broader militaristic and physical realities of ancient Greek and Roman societies. The same virtues of endurance, discipline, and physical prowess celebrated in the arena were essential for warfare and daily survival, ensuring that the games served as both entertainment and a reflection of prevailing cultural values. Historians still widely debate the precise causal relationship between the brutality of ancient sports and the level of violence in daily life, and whether the games merely reflected existing societal aggression or actively reinforced and perpetuated it. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about these echoes of violence and how they permeated daily life beyond the arena is the pervasive, unromanticized use of public physical punishment, not just for criminal offenses, remember those Zane statues and public floggings from Chapter 6, but often as a means of social control for debt, insolence, or even perceived laziness, meaning that many ordinary citizens, not just athletes, were regularly exposed to or experienced state-sanctioned physical pain as a fact of life, making the violence of the games less shocking. Imagine Theron, our Athenian farmer, seeing a neighbor who failed to pay his debts being publicly whipped in the agora, or a slave being beaten by his master for a minor transgression. These were not hidden acts, they were visible, audible demonstrations of power and control. The pain and humiliation inflicted in the stadium by the Hellenodikai were simply a more formalized, athletic version of the physical discipline that permeated households, workplaces, and public spaces. It's like living in a society where every minor infraction could get you publicly spanked, making a boxing match seem less extreme than it does to us. The legal systems of both Greece and Rome, while evolving, often permitted violent punishments. Floggings, brandings, and even more brutal forms of execution were common sights. Gladiatorial games in the Roman Empire, which became immensely popular, were essentially public spectacles of legalized violence and death, far exceeding even the brutality of the Greek combat sports in their scale and lethality. While the Olympics remained distinct, the Roman appetite for carnage, a potent force we examined in Chapter 8, certainly influenced the perception and perhaps the intensity of the Greek-style contests when they were held in Roman territories or under Roman patronage. Furthermore, domestic violence was largely unaddressed by the state, and masters had broad rights to physically punish their slaves. Children were disciplined with corporal punishment. Even philosophical discussions, while championing reason, did not shy away from acknowledging the role of physical force in maintaining order. The Roman paterfamilias, head of household, held immense power, including the right to inflict severe punishment, even death, on members of his household. The individual's body, whether slave or free, was often seen as subject to the will of another. The very concept of justice often involved a physical component. If you were wronged, seeking retribution, even through physical means, was sometimes considered legitimate, particularly for men in honor-bound societies. Dueling, though perhaps not formalized, could occur. This informal violence of daily life, where physical confrontation was a plausible outcome of a disagreement, stands in stark contrast to our highly regulated and generally non-violent daily interactions today. It truly sucked when a bad day could easily become a bloody one. Even the architecture of ancient cities reflected this acceptance of violence. Fortification walls were ubiquitous, a constant reminder of external threats. Public spaces often included areas for military drills or displays of power. The very layout of their world underscored the need for strength and the preparedness for conflict. The stadiums, too, with their hard surfaces and lack of safety features, were built for brutal contests, not for the comfort or long-term health of the participants. So, while the idea of the ancient Olympics as a symbol of pure athletic competition might be appealing, the stark reality of beyond the arena, echoes of violence, was a pervasive truth. This era reminds us that the brutality witnessed in the games was not an isolated phenomenon, but a direct reflection of societies where physical strength, endurance, and the capacity for violence were deeply ingrained values, proving that for millennia, the line between sport and combat, and between daily life and brutality, was far blurrier than we imagine, leaving us truly grateful for modern notions of civil discourse, regulated justice, and the widespread rejection of violence as an everyday solution that define our societies today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of ancient life, let's gently return from the profound reality of beyond the arena, echoes of violence, where the brutality of the ancient Olympic Games reflected the harsh, pervasive nature of ancient Greek and Roman societies. If we've just explored how violence permeated their daily lives, tonight we'll conclude our journey by contrasting that ancient brutality with our modern understanding, the fading echo, modern games, ancient shadows. You might see our Olympics as entirely distinct, but for your contemporary self, understanding the ancient games reveals how their ancient shadows still subtly linger, even as our modern games have sought to sanitize and redefine athletic competition, leaving us to ponder what we gained and perhaps what we subtly lost. Imagine yourself now, sitting comfortably on your couch, watching the opening ceremony of the modern Olympic Games. You see athletes from every corner of the globe, marching in pristine uniforms, their bodies sculpted by rigorous, scientifically informed training. You see state-of-the-art stadiums with cushioned tracks, advanced medical teams on standby, and referees ready to intervene at the slightest sign of danger. Boxers wear thick gloves and headgear. Rounds are strictly timed, and matches are stopped if one fighter is overwhelmed. Wrestlers compete on padded mats, and submission holds are immediately broken when a tap-out occurs. The emphasis is on fair play, sportsmanship, and the human spirit. This is the luminous reality of our modern games, a world away from the dusty, blood-soaked skama of Olympia, a stark contrast to combat sports. No holds barred from Chapter 2. Yet, if you listen closely, if you pay attention to the subtle currents, you might still perceive the fading echo of those ancient shadows, reminding us of the long, often brutal journey humanity has taken to reach this point, prompting us to consider what was left behind. It's like looking at a meticulously restored ancient vase, admiring its beauty, but knowing that its original purpose involved far rougher hands and far more dangerous contents. Our modern games are a testament to centuries of societal evolution, particularly in our understanding of human rights, safety, and the role of competition. The very concept of athlete welfare is paramount today. From the moment an aspiring Olympian begins their journey, they are typically supported by a vast network designed to maximize performance while minimizing harm. Nutritionists, strength coaches, physical therapists, and sports psychologists all work to ensure the athlete's holistic well-being. This is a universe apart from the raw, unsupervised training's torment we explored in Chapter 4, where bodies were pushed to breaking with little regard for the long-term health. The rules in modern sports are meticulously crafted to prevent severe injury and death. Head trauma in boxing is a major concern, leading to strict regulations. Foul play, like tripping an opponent. Remember our poor Philo and his discipline's cruelty from Chapter 6, results in disqualification, not public flogging. The idea of a fatality being more than just a game, as we discussed in Chapter 3, is utterly unthinkable. A catastrophic failure of safety protocols. Modern arenas are designed with spectator safety in mind, far from the chaotic high-risk chariot races where audiences craving carnage, a chilling detail from Chapter 8, might witness horrific, sometimes fatal, crashes. A common historical truth is that the modern Olympic Games represent a profound shift from their ancient predecessors, prioritizing athlete safety, fair play, and global participation over the brutal physicality and often lethal outcomes that characterized ancient competitions. This evolution reflects broader societal changes in values, technology, and medical understanding. Historians still widely debate the precise impact of commercialism and nationalistic fervor on the purity of the modern Olympic spirit, and whether these factors in their own way introduce new forms of pressure or ethical challenges that diverge from the original ideals. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about the fading echo of ancient shadows in our modern games is the subtle psychological ghost of ancient endurance, where even today's highly trained athletes, despite all their safety nets, often push themselves through immense pain, sometimes to the point of collapse or permanent injury, driven by an internalized, almost primal belief that victory demands extreme suffering, unconsciously echoing the ancient ideal of a rate achieved through torment, rather than purely through optimized performance. Imagine a marathon runner collapsing at the finish line, their body screaming in agony, or a gymnast pushing through a severe sprain to complete a routine. While we celebrate their grit and determination, this willingness to override pain signals and push beyond physical limits, often with long-term health consequences, has a direct lineage to the ancient understanding that true glory required a willingness to suffer, to truly pay the price of victory, a heavy cost we detailed in Chapter 7. It's like a finely tuned racing car, built for speed and safety, but the driver still mentally prepares for a crash because that's just what racers do. Yet, even in our sanitized, scientifically optimized modern games, ancient shadows linger. The relentless pursuit of victory, the pressure to break records, the drive to achieve perfection can still lead athletes to take extreme risks. Doping scandals, pushing bodies beyond healthy limits through performance-enhancing drugs, or competing with serious injuries, all speak to an underlying ethos that winning at all costs still exists, an echo of the ancient desire for dominance. Regardless of the personal physical cost, while we condemn overt violence, the self-inflicted violence of overtraining or chemical enhancement, in its own way, still pushes bodies to breaking. The spectatorial element also retains a subtle ancient flavor. While we don't cheer for actual carnage, The dramatic tension of a close contest, the potential for an upset, the sheer physical exertion on display all tap into a similar human fascination with peak performance and the boundaries of physical endurance. We are still captivated by raw power, by the athlete who seems almost superhuman, echoing the admiration the ancients held for their weaponized bodies. The excitement in a packed stadium today, even when a bone-jarring tackle or a powerful knockout occurs within rules, still holds a primal thrill that has roots in the ancient spectacle's appetite. And what did we lose? Perhaps in sanitizing the games, we lost a certain rawness, a more direct connection to the primal human struggle. The ancient games, for all their brutality, were undeniably visceral. They were a raw, unvarnished display of human strength, resilience, and pain. Modern sports, while safer, can sometimes feel overregulated, losing a degree of that raw, untamed intensity. There was a unique, if terrifying, purity in the ancient ideal of arete achieved through pure, unmitigated physical struggle, even if it led to death or disfigurement. The finality of the ancient consequences, a grim thought from Chapter 10 of our Roman series, lent a different kind of gravity to every competition. So, as you reflect on the journey we've taken through the brutal realities of the ancient Olympic Games, consider the profound transformation that has occurred. Our modern games are a testament to progress, to a greater value placed on human life and well-being. But the ancient shadows still stretch, subtly reminding us of the enduring human drive for competition, for glory, and for pushing the limits of the body. Even if the methods and consequences have dramatically changed, we have gained immense safety and fairness. But perhaps in our quest for order, we have also lost a whisper of that primal, unfiltered expression of human power.